Hello, and today we're reviewing the RYOBI PCL016B 18 volt high volume inflator. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first up we have the battery slot, and it's a pretty good showing here. The battery locks into place nice and securely without any sorts of looseness or play that could cause the battery to fall free. And what looseness or play there is, it's so minimum that it really isn't an issue. RYOBI did a fairly good job on this particular product, and I don't really have any major complaints about the overall, specs here. Everything seems to be fairly well engineered. And when it comes to runtime, it has a very long runtime using a 4 amp hour battery, and it should be able to fill up several air mattresses and deflate several air mattresses without you needing to swap your battery out. RYOBI claims that you can fill up to 55 queen mattresses, but since I don't have 55 queen air mattresses to test that on, well, I guess we're just going to have to take their word. But just to be on the safe side, I just always have a backup battery just in case. But for the most part, it's a fairly good showing, and I'm fairly happy with the overall performance that this particular tool can provide. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the 4 different nozzles that come with this particular inflator. Now, of the 4 nozzles, the first one's going to be the permanent one that pretty much lives on the end of your tool, and it's basically just an adapter. You can use the adapter on either the blowing port or on the sucking port on top of the tool, or vacuum port, and overall it works fairly well. You can use it on its own, but it does seem to work best when you apply a different nozzle on it. Now, the first nozzle is going to be a needle tip in nozzle, which is going to fit on fairly firm and securely, but does not lock into place, so there is a chance it could come loose, especially if you have it inserted into a port on a, say, mattress, inflatable toy, or exercise ball. It could pull free, so just don't be too rambunctious. And then next up after that, we have the sweeper attachment nozzle, and this is going to work great for when you need to clean off your workbench or work surface area, and you want to be able to have a little bit more control over where the debris goes. The sides of the nozzle are wider and the middle of it is narrower, so you get a higher volume of air going out the sides and a lower amount going through the front, so that you can kind of control where the debris is going. Overall, it works fairly effectively, and once you get the hang of it, it's a fairly nifty little tool to use. So for the most part, it's very well engineered. And then, of course, after that, we have the typical or traditional inflator nozzle, which is basically a needle attachment that has 2 holes on either side, and a blunt end. And this is the kind of nozzle you'll typically find on most manual pumps that you'd use to fill up an air mattress or exercise ball, or what have you. Overall, all these different nozzles work fairly effectively, and they all are, well, perfectly fine. The nozzle adapter, which sits on the front of your tool, can be used on the top port or on the front port, and you can use any of the nozzles on any of the different ports, but honestly, the vacuum port, the only real purpose for that is to deflate something, so you'd only be using that with the needle attachments, and that's about it. So for the most part, all these different nozzles work just fine, and even though they don't all lock into place, they seem to fit onto the end of the tool firmly and securely enough that you shouldn't have to worry about them falling off unless you get very rambunctious. Now, next up we have the nozzle holder on the base of the tool right above the battery, and honestly it can only hold 1 nozzle, which is going to be your blunt tip inflator nozzle, and it does just fine. It's not going to fall out easily, and it's going to stay in place even if you're throwing the tool around or jogging down the trail, so it does a pretty good job. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have a strap mount point. The strap mount point is located on the rear of the tool directly above the battery, and it will allow you to attach a strap. You will have to provide your own strap since RYOBI did not include a strap, but at least we did get a point that you could attach a strap to. It would have been also nice if they had included a belt clip point, but unfortunately we did not get that. But with that being said, I am happy to see the strap mounting point. So with that being said, let's move on. Okay, next up we have the handle, grip, ergonomics, and just the overall functionality of the tool. Overall, the grip on this particular tool is actually quite nice and very comfortable to hold. There's plenty of rubberized texture and gripping points, as well as indentations and grooves that help you maintain a secure grip on this particular tool when you're holding it in your hand. And there are also rubber bump or tip-over pads on the side of the tool to help protect any surface you might have it on, or the tool itself if it falls over. So quite frankly, they did do a very good job with the overall implementation of rubberized texture, bump points, and just the overall feeling in the hand. Now, where they didn't do such a good job is the fact that they didn't give you a short hose or any sort of extension that would make this a lot easier to use when you're filling up, say, something that is taller than the tool, or has a port that's in an awkward position where you can't get the tool into. You know, at the end of the day, it's little things like that that could go a long way to help with the overall functionality of this particular tool. And while this particular tool is still very useful and is still a fairly good value, it definitely would have benefited from having a small hose that you could attach and, well, basically, you know, extend your nozzle out to the port, wherever that might be. You know, it's one of those things that you don't really think about until you need it, and it just would have been nice having a short air hose that you could, you know, just increase the distance a little bit. So, you know, other than that, it's a fairly good showing here, and I have to say they did do a very good job with the grips and ergonomics of the tool, but when it comes to the overall usability, that not having a short air hose kind of hampers its performance a little bit. But with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, next up we have the trigger, and it's actually a fairly good showing here. The trigger itself is made out of black plastic with indentations for gripping, and for the most part it's a very good showing. If you don't pull the trigger all the way in, the tool will turn on and off with just pulling the trigger without having to, well, click it again. But if you do pull the trigger all the way in, it will turn the pump on and leave it running until you, well, pull the trigger again to turn it off. So it's basically a two-function trigger. One can be very useful for quick blowing activities when you want to blow dust off, say, a filter on a vacuum cleaner, or blow the dust off your workbench. And then the other function is going to be super useful for when you're inflating those air mattresses or exercise balls or inflatable kayaks. So for the most part, I don't really have any major complaints about the overall design, and I'm very happy to see that we got a two-function trigger on this particular tool. So props to RYOBI for having a good trigger on this particular product. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, last but not least, we have the vacuum port located on the top of the tool. This particular port will make use of the front adapter, so you can use the needle nose attachments in order to, well, completely remove the air from a, let's say, air mattress and exercise ball, inflatable kayak. You get the point. It's something that helps you get everything packed away once you get done using it, without the need of, well, having to, well, endlessly step on the end of the mattress in order to try to get all the air out. This can be super useful, especially when you're packing up camp and you have limited space. So I'm very happy to see that RYOBI decided to include the functionality of being able to access the, well, vacuum port on this particular tool. Now, I would not recommend trying to use this as a vacuum cleaner, because it just isn't going to end up working out very well since there's no bag, and you could potentially end up damaging the motor since there isn't a separation between the rotating turbines and a filter or anything like that. So just something to keep in mind. But as a way to remove air from an air mattress or exercise ball, it works very well. And I'm happy to see that RYOBI allowed the user to fully access the port on this particular tool. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. Okay, without a battery, the tool weighs 380 grams, which is going to be about 0.8 pounds. And with a 4 amp hour battery, it weighs 1,101 grams, which is going to be just over 2.4 pounds. So, you know, still a fairly light tool. Okay, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about this particular tool in use. I have to say, I really wasn't expecting to like this tool as much as I do. Typically, I don't buy tools I'm not all that interested in, but I found this particular tool to be, you know, something I figured I might use once in a blue moon, and so I decided to pick it up just to have it on hand in case I needed it for any reason. And, you know, surprisingly, I've been using it more than what I was expecting. I found this particular tool to be very useful, not in inflating things, but in order to clean the dust out of other objects. But we'll talk about that more here in a second. Size-wise, this particular tool is fairly large when it comes to an inflator, and there are definitely smaller inflators on the market that are more powerful but don't have removable or swappable batteries, which is one reason why I find this particular inflator so useful. Is, well, you know, even if your battery's dead, you can just pop a different battery in there and you're all good to go once again without having to wait several hours for the device to, well, charge up. So in that regard, I find this particular tool to be super useful, but it definitely could be a little bit more compact and a little bit more streamlined. So just something to keep in mind. Now, when it comes to its overall usability, I definitely think that inflating things, while that may be its key purpose, I don't think that's the thing that it's necessarily best at. Don't get me wrong, it's still a fairly good inflator and it can still be super useful, but for me personally, I personally like using this particular tool to clean out vacuum filters as well as, well, the dust and sawdust out of my saws after I get done using them, because quite frankly, I just hate getting sawdust all over the place, and using a bigger blower is a lot more awkward when you're trying to get, well, the dirt and debris out of the motor housing. And so, you know, quite frankly, I find this particular inflator slash sweeper slash blower to be super useful in that regard. So quite frankly, I'm pretty happy with its overall performance. And I think the runtime on this particular tool is actually very good. So with that being said, I think this particular tool definitely fills a niche in my arsenal of tools, and I find it to be super useful. Now, one reason why I didn't buy this particular tool sooner is I definitely think it's a little bit overpriced. I definitely think that the retail price on this particular tool should be much closer to the $30 mark rather than the $40 mark. $40 just feels like it's a little bit expensive for this sort of a tool, and I do have a hard time paying that amount of money, since you can obviously go on eBay or Amazon and find other inflators or other tools that work almost the same that have a battery for about the same cost. So, you know, the pros and cons there. But for the most part, I'm still happy with its performance, and even though it's a little bit overpriced, I think it's definitely still a tool worth taking a look at or trying to find used to have in your tool collection, especially if you like getting all the sawdust out of your saws when you get done using them. So in that regard, it works very well. Now, keep in mind that it still will take this particular tool a little bit longer to fill up, say, an inflatable exercise ball or inflatable boat or something that has a very small port on it, since there isn't a lot of pressure behind the air that it's moving. It's moving a lot of air, there just isn't much pressure behind it, so it can easily be deflected or hampered when it has to go into a small hole, and it just doesn't have the horsepower in order to push it through that smaller hole faster. So it is something to keep in mind. This will inflate something, but it's not going to do it nearly as fast as, say, an air compressor or, you know, a much more powerful air pump that has a lot more horsepower behind it. But, you know, it does do a fairly good job, and it does have a long runtime, so it will get the job done eventually. It just doesn't have a lot of oomph behind the amount of air that it is moving. So, you know, just something to keep in mind. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on to the pros and cons. Okay, the first pro is 18 volt. 18 volt means that this will work with all your RYOBI 18 volt batteries, and you can adapt batteries over from other brands using third-party adapters. Just remember, if you do that, you do that at your own risk. And the next pro would be the grip. The grip is very comfortable and ergonomic, and there is plenty of rubberized texture as well as bump pads. That means that this particular tool is very, well, you know, comfortable. So that's a pro in my opinion. 3 nozzles. In reality, there's really 4, but I'm not including the adapter. The 3 nozzle means that you'll be able to use this for dusting as well as blowing away debris and inflating different objects. So there's a lot of versatility, and it's a good design. So with that being said, let's move on to the next pro. Hard and soft trigger. Overall, the switch or trigger on this particular tool will allow you to either barely hold the trigger in order to have the motor turn on but turn off as soon as you release it, or you can hard press the trigger in order to turn the motor on permanently until the battery drains or you turn it off. So in my opinion, this is a very good design, and I think RYOBI did a very good job implementing this particular function. So with that being said, let's move on. Deflator. Overall, the fact that we did get a port on this particular tool that you can hook the nozzles in to turn this into a deflator is going to be super useful, and it is not something that you'll find on all inflators on the market. So in my opinion, this is a pro. And the last pro would be the strap mount. The strap mount point is going to allow you to attach a strap to this particular tool, which can be super useful in certain situations. So this is a pro in my opinion. And the first con would be the price. Overall, $40 is a little bit on the steep side for this particular tool. If it included a short hose and a belt mounting point for, you know, belt clips, it might have been worth it. But at $40 without a short hose or belt clip point, I just don't think that it's going to really be worth that, considering the you know, price point. So yeah, this is definitely a bit of a con. And the next con would be airspeed. It's an 18 volt tool, but there are definitely smaller blowers or inflators on the market that have faster air speeds. It's not horrible, it just isn't as good as it could be, and there are definitely tools on the market that are smaller that can outperform this particular tool. So the airspeed is a little bit of a con. And last but not least, we have no air hose. Not providing an air hose for your customers is definitely a little bit on the cheap side, RYOBI. And, you know, they're just not that expensive, but it's harder for a customer to come up with their own versus you just supplying one from the factory. So, you know, for the price that you're charging, an air hose should have been included. So with that being said, let's go ahead and move on. And that is it for the pros and cons. Final thoughts on this particular tool. Overall, I actually really like this particular tool. It's definitely not going to be the most powerful or best inflator on the market, but it is going to be super useful because it's compatible with all your RYOBI batteries, and it works great for getting the dust out of your saws or sanders, or cleaning out that vacuum cleaner. And when you need to fill up an air mattress or inflatable boat or something, it can be super useful in those particular circumstances as well. So quite frankly, I think RYOBI did a fairly decent job on this particular model, but if they decide to revise this model in the future, I would definitely recommend that they make it more powerful and include a hose with it. But with that being said, I think it's an excellent tool, and I would recommend it to anybody who is currently looking for this particular tool and doesn't mind paying $40 to buy it. So with that being said, this tool comes recommended. If you like this video, please like and subscribe, and we will see you all next time. God bless.